Broad Channel, an island in Jamaica Bay, is sinking. Tides in the bay are rising and storms are causing more damage. The residents of this Queens neighborhood are on track to become the first New Yorkers displaced by climate change.
I'm Don Reapy. I'm the Jamaica Bay Guardian for the American Littoral Society. I do anything and everything related to Jamaica Bay. I go to meetings, I work with all the different agencies around the bay. I'm working on restoration of salt marshes in the bay. In the summertime, I run a restoration corps where we hire students to work for 8 weeks. I patrol the bay. I do a lot of wildlife surveys for the National Park Service, and I give walks and talks on a regular basis. Well, this is an interesting community. It's an enclave within the bay. It's separated by 2 bridges. It's about 3,500 people living here. The whole community is about a quarter-mile wide. It's bisected by Cross Bay Boulevard, so we have an east side and a west side. I'm on the west side, and it's like living in a small town. Everybody sort of knows everybody. There's no any kind of industry. There's no shopping malls here. There's just a few stores. So it's a quiet, peaceful little area. And a lot of people here settle here because they like the water. They either, like to fish or get out and kayak in the bay. And many of us live right on the bay, on pilings, which can be a little precarious.
I've lived in Broad Channel since, I guess 17 years, but my father and my brother, my father always had this piece of property, and my brother had a house about 6 blocks that way.
Yeah.
Once you live here, if you see views like this and living on the water, it's hard to picture just moving back to Queens and Glendale where we all came from, because, open space. So it's beautiful, but it's getting harder. It's just getting harder.
I guess over my 35 years, probably the tide has risen another 4 or 5, maybe even 6 inches. We figure they say about 2 inches, 1.5 inches to 2 inches a decade, that it's increasing. So now, a couple of times a year, we have 7-foot tides, which we didn't have, 35 years ago.
It used to come up, maybe you'd have a nor'easter every couple of years. You had a crazy nor'easter storm, the storm of 92, and the perfect storm. And I would say after that storm, and what they say is true, once the water comes in, it's likely to come again. And since 92, I would say the tides have changed tremendously. Every year, worse and worse, The tide charts used to be back even 10 years ago. A 5-6 foot tide would be like, wow. Now 7-foot tide, like if you're reading, we have to pay attention to tides because of, our cars in the street. So 6 foot was normal. That was bad. Now 7 foot is normal in the paper. And you used to not see that. So, that's the hard part. The water is rising. And I think everybody here would say the same thing, who's lived here for a while.
She was trapped in the house. Her husband's away. He was in the service. And she had 2 or 3 kids. She had to swim out of the house with the kids, and she went up in there in the convent. That's a convent there. A rectory, rather. Mm-hmm. And she saved the kids, but she had to move, My name is Kevin Keegan. It's Kevin, Keegan.
Perfect. How long have you lived here in Broad Channel?
Approximately 40 years. Well, the neighborhood hasn't changed that much, but the high tides have changed a lot. I noticed there's so many more storms we're having now than we ever had before. Definitely worse. Very rarely you had storms here years ago. And all of a sudden, I guess with the global warming, all that ice melting must be doing something, with the tides.
Well, what I'm doing is, if you look out over there, there's a couple of marshes. That's all created. So that's a marsh that the Corps of Engineers brought the sand in. They put it at the right elevation. We planted all the spartina. So one is that 10-acre plot there has over 150,000 plugs of Spartina alterniflora. So it's all, you know, growing together, and we're getting a nice substantial new marsh there. We have another 20-acre piece behind that. So we're working on restoring these marshes that have declined over the years, that have eroded. Well, the first thing is the Corps of Engineers has to find clean sand to bring in here. They pump it in, they bring a barge in, they bring a big pipe in, they slurry the sand on the marsh, then they have laser-guided bulldozers that will grade it to the right elevation so the plants will be inundated twice a day, but they'll have a drying out period. So you don't want to have it too low or too high. So when it's that elevation, then we put a big fence around it to try to keep the geese out, and we planted the whole thing over the last 5 or 6 years out there. And we're hoping that over time they'll all grow together and it'll form a new stable marsh. And those marshes are invaluable to wildlife because a lot of the finfish, the marine invertebrates spend part of their life cycle in these marshes. And they also act as a big buffer to the community. So if you have a substantial marsh in front of your community, that's going to, you know, take the wave action and will dissipate it. So those are the thoughts that's going on. The city has a program called Build It Back, where they're building houses higher, another 10 feet higher in elevation. So they jack up the house and they use the downstairs as either a carport or as a basement, and people are living, you know, 10 feet higher now. So a lot of people opted to do that. Those of us living right on the edge couldn't be in that program. It's be too difficult to jack up this whole house. So we just have to, you know, live with it. Hope there's not another Sandy, but over time it's going to be a problem, you know.
You know, they just raised our block 3 feet. They raised the street itself 3 feet. We raised our house on top of this raised street. And last week, the water came up the block a little bit, you know, a foot. I mean, before the street was repaired, it probably would have been about 3 feet of water. But I don't know if we're going to beat this battle.
I guess if you look at life, I'm sort of a rationalist. I say, no matter what you do, at the end of life, you die anyway. But what are you going to sit around and you know, wring your hands and cry? You do what you can. Hopefully the next generation will figure out something better. I mean, right now they're working on possibly putting a big barrier at the mouth of the bay, a big gate that can close during storm tides, storm surges, and not allow the excess water to come in. So those are big plans, big capital projects, multi-billion-dollar projects that the Corps of Engineers is working on.